Welcome in, everybody. Let's get right into it. Now, there have been a ton of major happenings going down with Disney that are really not in their favor lately. And I think the root of it all started with their streaming service, though I know plenty of people blame the previous head of Disney, Bob Chapek, or as people who I know work for Disney call him, Bob Paycheck. I've harped on it for as long as I can remember, but Disney Plus shows and movies they've either had the problem of being far too short or not being exciting and engaging at all. The two biggest test cases have been their Star Wars and Marvel franchises. Now, for example, who is still talking about Kenobi or Book of Boba Fett? Nobody. Who's raving about Miss Marvel, She-Hulk, or Falcon and the Winter Soldier? Not a peep. But why? Well, because for one reason or another, they all lost their core audiences and did not hold any real interest. Sadly enough, any good show like Loki or The Mandalorian have become the exception rather than the rule. But let's talk about The Mandalorian for a second, because it's gotten the lowest ratings out of all 3 seasons, and a lot of fans are saying that they either quit Disney Star Wars altogether or they were incredibly disappointed in it. There have not been too favorable of a view on this latest season. Now, season 3 wrapped up not too long ago, and I gotta say, I have to agree. It was really disappointing and lackluster. It felt very shocking after the first 2 seasons. And I remember I had theorized that this would be the season to focus on reunification of the clans and claiming the planet Mandalore, with Din Djarin being sort of this reluctant king kind of character, or at least a leader who had been forced into the role. But what we got, I mean, it was a lot of scattered plot. It was senseless side quest adventures. It's a very watered down shoot 'em up that made little sense in a lot of places. There was a ton across the season that was less than satisfactory, if not just downright boring. Now, firstly, the 3rd season is lacking almost all sense of originality that we had in abundance in the 1st season. Nothing is really new. We've had all the same characters for the most part, and the new ones that we get in the season are kind of grown and eye-roll worthy, but we'll get to that later. We have this big feeling, like I said, of side questing going on, like with Dr. Pershing. His story kind of goes nowhere, other than to cement that the New Republic is pretty horrific and just as terrible as the Empire was. Like, they torture and brainwash people. So yeah, that's just about it. It's just the Empire in more diverse outfits and alien species running the things, and it deserves to be destroyed. We also get the same old villain that we've had for the past 2 seasons with Moff Gideon. And we did get our first glance at the Shadow Council that's controlling the standing Imperial remnant for the most part across the galaxy. This Shadow Council that's comprised of Moffs and admirals and administrators that's scattered around the galaxy. Now that part was kind of cool, but considering what we know that we could have had with the old EU and the Warlord era that lasted for a good 40 books and a couple of dozen comic book runs. I mean, it's very bland and vanilla to me, and I know to a lot of others. And this version of the Council, as well as Disney Star Wars shows in general, kind of highlight a big problem for me. They make the galaxy of Star Wars feel just so small when it's actually abysmally massive. And again, not to sound like, I'm beating this horse into glue, and I really do hate being one of those guys. One of those nerdy guys that's like, oh, well, in the books, But in the old expanded universe, we understood just how big the galaxy was. You could feel it. During the Warlord era, which in the old version of the time period that the Mandalorian inhabits, about 5 years after Endor, the galaxy is divided up into a whole bunch of different regions, and they're all vying for power. And these are just the Imperials we're talking about here. You had the Pentastar Alignment, the Greater Maljarud, Zinja's Empire, the core sector-centric Imperial remnant that had Coruscant as its capital. You had the Empire of the Hand with Grand Admiral Thrawn, kind of out in the unknown regions. You had the Ariadu Authority, the Empire Reborn under a cloned Emperor Palpatine, if that doesn't sound familiar. And those are just the major players out there, and just within the Empire's scope of things. I mean, you still had minor outliers and warlords like Blitzer Harsk with the Zero Command. He was in the Deep Core, or the Maw Command under Natasi Dala. But in other sectors of the galaxy, like I said, remember that's just the Imperials. You also had other big factions that were kind of throwing their weight around, right? You had the Hapens and the hegemony of the Hapes cluster. The Hutts still had their ironclad rule over Hutt space. The Avathan Duskon League, with their fleet of captured Star Destroyers known as the Black Fleet. And there's a few dozen unaligned sectors and governments that wanted nothing to do with either the New Republic or the Empire. And this is something that I think would radically help Disney Star Wars become much stronger and more fan engaging if they would just make things as big and as interesting as they used to be. I mean, take the sequels, for example. Everything happens in what? A year's time? Just a year? Maybe a little over a year? And what happens? The Republic that we know nothing about gets wiped out in a couple of hours. The bad guys get beaten pretty easily. Their leaders get killed pretty easily. We have no connection to any of the main characters. No one's story really gets told. I mean, we thought we were going to get some stories told. Like, there's this stormtrooper that goes rogue and joins the rebellion. we've had that story before. Those of us that are very familiar with the EU, that story is pretty prevalent in the books. There's a lot of ex-Imperials or ex-Stormtroopers that become really important characters. So that's a story that got us excited. But we didn't get to see or hear or experience Finn's story at all. We got a little bit of background. We got him screaming Rey's name. We see him get sliced in the back by a lightsaber that should have killed him, if not permanently paralyzed him, because he gets a lightsaber right across the spine. It's very lackluster. It's very disappointing. I mean, again, this all goes back to my main point. What the EU gave us, it was a galaxy's worth of substance. That's, I think, my main point, is the new stuff is lacking substance. I mean, hell, there's a whole book dedicated to Han Solo kidnapping Princess Leia because the Republic is trying to marry her off to Prince Isolde of the Hapes Cluster, which is a very wealthy and fleet-rich government, in order to gain their support. Now, it's not one of the best books in the old EU, by far. A lot of people think it's a boring read, but we get a lot of background and emotion and heavy universe-impacting subplot and all these tangible consequences that carry on in later books and stories. And the book is basically just Han getting over himself and stop being him stopping being a smug asshole and eventually asking Leia to marry him while he's on the run from the government. It's a pretty fun premise. And also way more than we got in, say, the third season of The Mandalorian. Which leaves fans like me very confused. Because if there's all of these great stories and rich, deep lore to draw from, why are Disney's Star Wars showrunners continuously dropping the ball? I understand that we cannot have all of the OG characters back in action again. Luke, Han, Leia, Chewie, and the rest, for various reasons. I get it. A big reason being that the damn sequel trilogy really boxed us in with exactly how certain stories would have had to end it up, but you could create new characters and give them those stories, and they would still work. I mean, like I said, the galaxy is a huge place. You could make those new characters, which is what Disney did. They did make those new characters. They just didn't give them any story. They didn't give them any substance. They just said, here, isn't this new thing shiny? Play with it. We're like, come on, give us something. But yeah, digressing back to this tiny ass feeling that Mando Season 3 gave us, it's just another big reason why it feels so small and sheer lack of how many Mandalorians we actually get in the show. I mean, you're talking about a culture that spans across the galaxy, right? And we get maybe, 50 individuals in the show? That's it? I mean, in the Knights of the Old Republic game, in its history, when the Mandalore called, the warrior clans responded from across the galaxy, and it was enough of a gathering to create a fleet and an army that conquered whole systems and threatened the Old Republic. But what we got? About 50 Mandalorians, a couple of clawcraft fighters, about 5 gauntlets, and a super easy to blow up light cruiser, and a couple of Gazanti class that just disappeared out of nowhere. Don't know what happened to about half of that fleet whenever the TIE fighters and bombers went up to destroy the light cruiser. I mean, this is what I mean by there being a size problem, and why Disney Star Wars needs to look at what we used to have in order to save itself. I mean, hell, look at how well it worked out for other franchises. Who doesn't still feel this rush of emotion when they see the ride of the Rohirrim in the Return of the King to save Gondor? Or, I know this is a personal favorite of mine, but whenever Bane and his criminals clash with the cops in the Dark Knight movie. Or how about Marvel? The biggest cinematic fight between Thanos' army and all of the assembled Avengers and their gathered forces of, they had wizards and Asgardians and Wakandan warriors. I mean, fans love big armies and huge fleets of ships and heroes and villains. And it doesn't need to be an all-the-time thing, necessarily. I mean, you don't have to have the Battle of Endor every episode or every movie. I mean, it can have a steady and casual build-up, giving us time to breathe and grow with the situations, that lead up to the final fight. But we could still have some great, dog fights with some squads of fighters. We could see the Mandalorians needing to, free a city or a planet from an Imperial Remnant faction. We could have had a Dark Jedi or an Inquisitor leading some kind of crusade to establish a new faction that cuts into Mandalorian space. I mean, the possibilities, nearly endless. And in its place, we got something that was very, very disappointing to fans across the aisle, it seemed. But what made it so disappointing, aside from its lack of size and substance? Well, we had some very big name cameos that were just kind of throwaway jokes, basically, and they were really very cringe-worthy, at least to some of us. And it's Jack Black, it's Lizzo especially. A weird one for me was Christopher Lloyd, because they made him this separatist who was having this army of reprogrammed battle droids. They were killing people in this clandestine nature, and all of this felt like a Clone Wars episode or Star Wars Rebels episode, to be honest, and not a Mandalorian episode. I could feel Dave Filoni's writing in this episode especially. And it's one of those side questy episodes, and I hate those, because this is only, an 8-episode season? What are we doing? Doing side quests. Why are we side questing? We only have maybe 35 minutes an episode. It's not a lot of time to get things done. And I think the budget was $10 to $15 million an episode. This is how you're spending it? Like, why? It doesn't make any sense. Especially if you're writing a Clone Wars episode for The Mandalorian. Because that's where those cameos fit. Not in this space western turned kind of war preparation series. It fits in a silly, comical / dark and serious cartoon about war. That's where this kind of episode fits. And how do I explain? You ever have a party and a couple walks in and they just suck the energy out of the room, and now no one is having fun anymore? That's what those cameos did to this damn season. I mean, we side quested for absolutely no reason. It just pisses me off. And if that episode and the ones where we focus on Dr. Pershing were changed instead to deal with, I don't know, Mandalorian-centered issues, or if we had Moff Gideon's spy, Elia Kane, yeah, that captured Imperial that was on Coruscant getting reprogrammed in the New Republic Reformation system. If we had her like go on all of these secret undercover missions and things, that would be really cool. I would love that. Make it an Andor-esque episode, and I'd be perfectly fine with that. Andor was great. But I think this season would have been received far better than it actually was, with most fans either rating it very low or deciding to stop watching altogether. Again, there are other Mandalorian factions that were created by Disney that still exist in universe that we could have seen. We could have had like the Saxon clan, the Wren clan with Sabine Wren, by the way, who's going to be in the Ahsoka series that came from Rebels. You had the Protectors of Concord Dawn. And all of these are from the Clone Wars and Rebel shows. Not to mention the other clans that pledged loyalty to Bo-Katan at the end of her arc in Rebels. And the weird thing is, Mandalorian's 5 years after Endor. Rebels is kind of is happening in between the movies. So it's not that far apart. It's like maybe 10 years apart. So all of these clans of Mandalorians, they're still out there. We could have gotten a lot more than we did based on what we know is out there because of what Disney's given to us previously. It could have been a lot bigger, a lot better. To put it simply, it could have been a lot better. Now, we're also kind of Monday morning quarterbacking. And there are those classic questions of, wait, how did this happen? Or, why did they do that? In several cases, scattered kind of throughout the season, that just bugged the hell out of people. Like when Din Djarin gets captured by Moff Gideon's forces, he doesn't have his armor taken off of him. I mean, he's still fully armed. He's not being led off by this squadron of stormtroopers or a Praetorian guard. I mean, it's just two guys. You have a warrior in full blaster-proof armor, and you're just like, nah, two guys, you got this. You can handle him. I mean, really? Also, how exactly did Grogu get to him if the blast doors got sealed, between where he and Din were, and if Grogu's running off with all the rest of the Mandalorians when they're escaping? And why did no one else go with the child to save Din Djarin? And also, if this is some, massive secret Imperial base, where's all the stormtroopers and officers and Imperial droids and things? I don't know. The plot armor is very heavy with this season. So I think that all of that kind of surmises the issues with this third season of The Mandalorian, and it was bad. It was really bad. Almost as bad as the rest of Disney's issues at the moment. I mean, they're getting rid of Disney Plus, basically, and combining it with Hulu. They had to shut down their Star Wars hotel. There's absolutely no excitement around things like the Marvels. Ant-Man Quantumania did less than great at the box office. Visitation to the parks is getting low due to constant price hikes. So, yeah, Disney's not doing so well at the moment. And unfortunately, I think it's going to affect Star Wars in a major way. I think it's going to affect Marvel in a major way. I don't foresee this going well for either franchise, unfortunately. But, maybe this will be for the better. Instead of the watered-down, cardboard cutout schlock Disney has been giving us, maybe we'll actually get something worth a damn. Maybe they'll recognize their faults, and they'll authorize some game developer to make like a Star Wars Empire at War 2, a Battlefront 3, an Imperial Commando game, something actually worth our time and money. That's another thing that Disney Star Wars really dropped the ball on. The Jedi Survivor game came out, and it's not doing great either. Yeah, people are just kind of shrugging and being like, it's okay. It's out there. The early release had a ton of bugs, apparently. It had a lot of problems in that early release. But I think the showrunners over at Lucasfilm, Favreau, Filoni, and Kennedy, unfortunately, are all kind of proud and satisfied in their work. I don't think they're listening to anybody. I don't think they're listening to fans. And it's highly unlikely that we'll get something good out of Disney Star Wars for quite some time. Now, in lieu of that, I highly recommend the novel series from the old EU, the original Thrawn trilogy, the X-Wing series, the New Jedi Order, the old Empire at War game, which has a ton of mods that you can add on in Steam, and those are a ton of fun. I play those religiously. And then there's the Republic Commando games that you can get, and those are pretty dirt cheap because they're kind of old. But yeah, immerse yourself in quality Star Wars and just relax, knowing that there's a lot of greatness still to be enjoyed in the franchise. Well, that is all I had for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to more Sci-Fi Unchained. But for now, live long and prosper, my friends, and may the Force be with us all.